APC Technologies. We're here at World Hydrogen North America Conference doing interviews with thought leaders and some pretty smart people about the hydrogen economy and the hope it has. Our sponsors are, of course, APC Technologies, World Hydrogen Leaders, and, of course, H2 Scan, whose advanced sensing technology for the hydrogen economy. Things are changing rapidly, and you will hear some amazing things from amazing people who are decarbonizing the world and who are moving hydrogen forward. So join us. Enjoy these interviews.
Welcome to Stream C on infrastructure and investment. My name is Cynthia Quarterman, and I'll be chairing this afternoon session. It's my pleasure to introduce our first panel, which is Building Safe and Reliable Infrastructure to Meet Emissions Reduction Goals. Our moderator this afternoon is Sandra Safro. She is the Associate General Counsel, Energy and Technology Regulation at Edison Electric Institute. Prior to joining EEI, Sandra was a partner at KL Gates, LLP, where she advised clients on complex regulatory and policy questions related to FERC and DOE. Sandra's practice included assisting clients with issues related to hydrogen regulation and the development of hydrogen projects. Sandra, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, for that introduction, and thank you to World Hydrogen Leaders for inviting me to speak on this panel today, or to moderate this panel. We've got 4 really great speakers. We have a limited amount of time for this really important topic, so I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. I'm going to introduce each of our speakers. They will provide a couple minutes of opening remarks, and then we'll move into a moderated Q&A. If you have questions for them, I think you put them into the Slido app, and we'll be able to see them on the screen. We'll leave a couple minutes towards the end also just for audience questions. So to start us off today, we are joined by Alan Ross, who serves as head of communications for H2 Scan, which is a California-based company that does work on advancing sensors for hydrogen detection. He also co-founded and is CEO and managing editor of APC Media, so you may have seen Alan doing interviews outside the room today. And Alan also co-founded and served as president of the Electric Power Reliability Alliance. So Alan, I will turn it over to you for some opening remarks, and I've asked each of our speakers to try to keep their remarks to about 5 minutes, so I will do my best to indicate to you when your 5 minutes are up.
So the agreed upon method to know that the 5 minutes are up is a punch in the face for Rich and I, and a tap on the shoulder for everybody else. It's interesting. I've retired twice from the power industry. And the reason I went back and did the magazine thing was my wife said, you need to find something to do. And also because there's so much change. And I'm really passionate about infrastructure change. And I think as we look at this whole hydrogen economy, I authored an article about 6 months ago, and it got picked up by a number of publications, and it was Hydrogen, Hype or Hope. Because back in the early 2000s, George Bush said the hydrogen economy is upon us, and then it died. And we just didn't get anywhere with it. And then when the wind energy, everything's wind, and then it kind of collapses. And then you see a lot of situations where wind, solar, I mean, there's a lot of things that are happening in the power industry. And then along comes decarbonization, decentralization, and then also digitalization for the power industry as a whole. And you look at it and you say, how are we going to get there? I'm absolutely convinced that hydrogen is going to be one of the ways, but the infrastructure, we can't create a whole new infrastructure. And one of the beauties about hydrogen is we can do hydrogen in many of the infrastructures. If you use ammonia for storage, we ship ammonia all over the world. We have an infrastructure of ships and storage facilities. The same is true of a lot of things, and hydrogen can play an important, if not critical, part of all of that, but it won't be the whole of that. And so I think one of the things that we're going to need to see is how do we use existing infrastructure? And I'll give you an example. I've heard it here several times. Oh, we're going to pump hydrogen into the gas lines. Hydrogen's the smallest molecule. It does damage to the inner sides of a pipeline. We've already found that out. So how are you going to use this infrastructure that's built? Well, you have to think of a creative way of doing it. There are, I think, 8 to 10 pilot projects that take a pipe and thread it through a pipe and put hydrogen in that pipe. Brilliant, because you don't have to dig up everything. You use an existing infrastructure. And whether it's storage or whether it's production or whether it's shipping or whether it's the pipeline, that's going to be the deal for the future, is collaboration. I asked everybody that I've interviewed here, tell me about collaboration in the hydrogen industry. Do you see it, or are we all after a money grab? Buy my thing. My thing is the only way. You know the beauty about hydrogen? There's no one only way thing. If somebody says, I have the only solution, don't finance it, don't buy it, don't use it. Because this is going to take a collaborative approach from government, definitely government, from think tanks, from a lot of different places in order to make this work. And we were all given 5 minutes, but I'm going to turn my time over to Rich.
Thank you, Alan. I appreciate the deferral of time to your fellow panelist. So next we're joined by Rich Craig. Rich is the Vice President of Technical and Regulatory Affairs for the Compressed Gas Association, which he joined in February of 2011. He has over 44 years of experience with compressed gas facility operations, engineering, and safety, and has worked as a plant engineer, a plant manager, operations manager, engineering manager, and director of process safety. So Rich, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sandy, and thank you to World Hydrogen Leaders for this opportunity, and thank you for pointing out I can't hold a job. Let me talk a little bit about CGA and then talk about hydrogen standards. CGA is an SDO, Standard Development Organization, and a trade association for the industrial gas industry. We have about 150 members who are involved in the manufacture, transport, and storage of industrial gases, including hydrogen. In fact, our members, many of our members are leaders in the production, transport, and storage of hydrogen and have been doing it for many, many years. We know hydrogen. You know, hydrogen is a topic that is top of mind now to a lot of people, but hydrogen's been an industrial product for decades. We wrote our first hydrogen publication in 1955, which only a few of us remember. What's new about hydrogen today is the application, more the energy applications that are being developed all over the place. So hydrogen's a very old technology, it's a very old product, but it's getting a new lease on life or another lease on life or new uses in all the energy applications that are being talked about today. A couple years ago, we did some research or had a company do some research for us on hydrogen. And one of the questions we asked was about hydrogen safety. And only about 12% of the respondents thought hydrogen was very safe. And the reason for that is a single word that probably most of you can guess, but I'll tell you anyway. It's Hindenburg. You know, everybody's heard of Hindenburg and hydrogen, and they are closely associated. Not only from history, but just recently. I don't know if any of you had seen the Netflix movie Glass Onion. There's a line in there about the Hinden House. I'll maybe a spoiler alert, but I'll let you know that it doesn't turn out very well for the Hinden House. So there is concern about hydrogen. Now, our research also showed about 92% of the respondents felt that they would only use hydrogen fuel cells if they were safe. So how do you prove to people that they're safe? You have standards in place. You know, standards are something that we are all accustomed to, and they give us a sense of comfort that people who are using products or designing products know what they're talking about. Standards sometimes get a bad rap. You know, they're viewed as being something that stifles innovation or slows things down. but they're really beneficial. The U.S. Military has a saying, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And the basis of that is if you have detailed ways of doing things and you train and you always do things the way they're supposed to be done, they're ultimately going to be done faster because you're not going to have rework, you're not going to have problems. And that is also true for standards and hydrogen standards. If we have effective standards in place, they'll keep bad things from happening. You know, one of my favorite sayings is standards are history lessons, so that if you have a bad event, you write a standard about it that looks at the root causes, addresses the root causes, and puts in place mitigations to keep that from happening again. And standards are just that. They're history lessons. They keep incidents from happening. What we don't want to have happen is in this rush to adopt hydrogen is have people do things that don't make sense or seem to be expedient, because that'll lead to incidents, and incidents will lead to regulations. Regulations are good. I'm not against regulations. We often ask for regulations. But regulations that are as a result of an incident are sometimes knee-jerk. They're not effective and appropriate as regulations need to be. You know, in that knee-jerk reaction, they come and they put in place requirements that don't make sense, they're not effective, they're not appropriate, and actually hinder what you're trying to do and don't solve the problem. So standards are very important. The next thing is, not only do you need standards, you need people to know about the standards. People have to understand what they can do, what they can't do, and why they can and can't do that. We CGA just stood up what we call our Safe Hydrogen Project. That's a tool that's available on our website that will list hydrogen standards, list the information that's necessary to use hydrogen safely. What's important is that that people understand that. And some of the newcomers may not fully understand or be readily willing to accept hydrogen standards. We have on our website snackable content is something we call it, short videos that provide pathways to the standards, provide pathways to new entrants into the hydrogen space for understanding the standards that need to be followed. So, you know, one of the things I ask, and I won't give you as much time back, one of the things I ask is, you need to make hydrogen part of the discussion. One of the first questions you should be asking, whether you're a practitioner building a hydrogen installation or a user considering a hydrogen installation, is how is this going to be safe? How are you going to make it safe? How are you going to ensure that I can use this safely and don't get anyone hurt? In closing, I'll just, a little blurb here for the safehydrogenproject.org, our website. It has our information about standards, it has our snackable content, and it gives you the opportunity to join the discussion about hydrogen standards.
Thank you so much, Rich. We'll circle back to some of those themes because they're very important. Next, we'll hear from Francesca Siliberti, who is of counsel at Greenberg Traurig in Denver. She focuses her practice on regulatory and litigation issues before federal and state agencies, including the Department of Energy and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. She has significant experience in the molecule space, including related to pipelines. And before joining Greenberg Traurig, Francesca worked in FERC's Office of Enforcement as well as its Office of General Counsel. So Francesca, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you, Sandy. So needless to say, I love regulations, Craig. And 18 years ago when I began at FERC, I never thought we would be having this conversation. So I think why we can all agree that hydrogen will be critical to our nation's energy transition, I'm concerned, and collectively there's academic debate about this, that the hydrogen market infrastructure development may be hindered by the lack of federal regulatory certainty. So currently in the United States, there are about 1,600 miles of hydrogen pipelines. Some of those are interstate pipelines, the other are purely intrastate. Why that's relevant is that there is no federal statute that expressly provides jurisdiction over hydrogen pipelines, which is incredible given where we are today, in my mind. There are two existing statutes, I believe, that can be read to confer jurisdiction over hydrogen. Those would be the Natural Gas Act and then the Interstate Commerce Act. So the Natural Gas Act, I'm sure you all are familiar, grants FERC jurisdiction over natural gas pipelines, interstate transportation of natural gas pipelines, and then the Interstate Commerce Act grants FERC's jurisdiction over interstate oil pipelines. Interestingly, in the Natural Gas Act, natural gas, to be subject to FERC regulation, you have to be, quote, natural gas, or you can be artificial gas as long as you're blended with natural gas. The reason that I think this is relevant and or interesting is that there's great debate as to, again, the appropriate regulation of hydrogen pipelines. Does that fall under the Interstate Commerce Act, i.e. oil pipelines, or does that fall under the Natural Gas Act, natural gas pipelines? I believe that it's most logical to regulate hydrogen interstate pipelines under the Natural Gas Act for any number of reasons. The first is that the Natural Gas Act, when a pipeline applies to FERC for its certificate of authority, with such certificate of authority, you are granted federal preemption, such that you're streamlined this entire certification process for the construction and siting of your pipeline, which means you get to obviate all of these conflicting different state and local federal government permitting standards, which are arduous at best. Under the Natural Gas Act, the hydrogen interstate pipelines would benefit, I believe, from being regulated under the Natural Gas Act, because critically, the Natural Gas Act confers eminent domain, federal eminent domain rights, which means the ability to take and or condemn property for the construction and siting of your interstate pipeline, of course, for just compensation. That eminent domain rights are very, very powerful. Conversely, on the FPA, the Federal Power Act side, electric transmission facilities do not have the right of eminent domain, and so they have to go through, the local and state permitting processes, and that has been notoriously challenging for the development of electric transmission facilities. I would also mention, FERC is an incredible agency. Obviously, I'm biased, but I believe they have extensive experience regulating natural gas pipelines. And indeed, FERC's predecessor, the Federal Power Commission, have been regulating successfully natural gas pipelines since 1938, I believe it is. A couple other points. Hydrogen pipelines would benefit from the rate oversight pursuant to the Natural Gas Act, which would require interstate hydrogen pipelines, that is, everything has to be intrastate, to publish their rates. And so that ensures that rates are just and reasonable. Additionally, open access. It's a concept that's very important on the energy, both electric and gas side. But the hydrogen market, I believe interstate hydrogen pipelines would benefit from open access, which is that any shipper that agrees to pay the published rate would be provided transportation service. And so, it's good to have diverse market participation. There were other things I intended to say, but I suppose in sum, I think we need a robust hydrogen infrastructure. Without question, and I think that the Natural Gas Act, if we are limited to the current regulatory statutes, unless Congress creates their own new hydrogen regulatory statute, I think interstate hydrogen pipelines would benefit from regulation under the Natural Gas Act, primarily because of federal preemption and then eminent domain rights.
Thank you so much, Francesca. That's a hugely important question as we look to build out midstream infrastructure for hydrogen. Our last, but certainly not least, panelist is Laura Nelson. Laura is VP of Sustainability and Public Policy at Southwest Gas, which provides service to over 2 million customers in Arizona, Nevada, and parts of California. Laura is a nationally recognized economist with over 20 years of experience in energy and natural resources. And prior to joining Southwest Gas, she served as special advisor to the Green Hydrogen Coalition. So Laura, I'll turn it to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Sandy. It's really fun to be here. And I have to note that my former boss, Janice Lynn, is here with the Green Hydrogen Coalition. And it was really such an honor to be part of that effort to really elevate the conversation around hydrogen. I like that you shared you'd never think we'd be having this conversation 18 years ago, because I would say it was in a similar space. I've had the honor to also work for two amazing governors, Governor Huntsman in Utah, and then later Governor Herbert. And certainly with Governor Huntsman, we explored the opportunities for hydrogen, really leaning into the California model around how we could advance transportation in hydrogen. Well, you know, several years later, almost 20 years later, California has certainly made significant strides within the space of hydrogen and looking at other pathways beyond transportation today as well. Utah does not have a hydrogen highway. I don't think there's a single hydrogen fueling station, but it doesn't mean that we didn't start exploring those opportunities. And under Governor Herbert, we had a keen interest in hydrogen as a future fuel source, really embracing, leaning into the energy transition opportunities. And we began holding hydrogen symposiums, I think the only state at the time, around 2015. And I think we had at the first one around 30 people. And when I left his office in 2020 and we had the last symposium, we had switched venues several times. It was standing room only, over 300 people, and we had to turn people away. So it is so exciting to see all of the conversation that is taking place here. And I know many folks are out having conversation. Appreciate all of you being in here for this one. I'm now at Southwest Gas, and as Sandy mentioned, I am the Vice President of Sustainability and Public Policy. It is a new role at Southwest Gas, and what I would say is that we are leaning in to the energy transition. If we're gonna reach our climate goals by 2050, it's gonna take all of us working together to reduce CO2 emissions, because this is, in fact, an economy-wide issue. We are owners of infrastructure. We are predominantly a distribution utility, as Sandy mentioned, serving in 3 states, where it is our responsibility to deliver safe, reliable, affordable energy to our customers. We do also own a smaller set of transportation assets. So our transmission transportation assets make up about 1,400 miles of our portfolio. Our distribution pipeline makes up around 35,000 miles of our pipeline portfolio. So significant infrastructure that is modern infrastructure. About 81% of our pipe has been upgraded or replaced in the last several years, significantly reducing leaks by about 500%, while at the same time our service territory has more than doubled in terms of the customers that we serve. So we're very committed to delivering a safe and modern infrastructure that can actually look at how we incorporate these new innovative technologies. We are regulated. We're regulated at the state level, and then also, of course, by FERC. And so we believe fundamentally we have to work with regulators if we're going to bring on these new molecular and energy services opportunities for customers. We have at the state level been very successful at finding pathways to integrate resources like renewable natural gas, even though the molecule looks very much, looks the same really as a natural gas molecule. There can be different requirements around characteristics and safety for that, so we have to work very closely with regulators on that. We have worked with universities, namely University of Arizona and University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and now working with GTI on how you safely move hydrogen blends within a pipeline and how they perform downstream, because that's also going to be very important. And we believe addressing these questions can help to inform a national approach around how we are going to provide for safe delivery of hydrogen, because that's really what it's going to take. We need that national approach, and I think there are many different agencies that are going to play a part in this. Department of Energy, possibly EPA, definitely FERC, and it's going to be a comprehensive effort if we're going to see this economy move forward to make sure that we can protect customers and have that safe, reliable supply of energy and meet our climate goals. So I'll stop there.
Oh, great. Well, thank you all so much. Those were very helpful opening remarks for the purposes of our conversation. We got a question through Slido, and please, everyone, feel free to put your questions in, that I think actually ties into one of the questions we were planning to talk through already. The question is, as an investor, how can I get comfortable around discussions on infrastructure safety and other topics? I think there's been a theme of having discussions. And so the question that I would pose, maybe first to you, Rich, and then others, please feel free to jump in, is what are some of the federal safety guidelines for hydrogen? You talked about history lessons. You've talked about how long-standing the use of hydrogen has been in our country, even though we're now thinking of expanded uses. So can you talk a little bit about what some of the safety guidelines are that exist?
I certainly can. As I said, hydrogen's been in use for several decades. Transport of hydrogen by pipeline has been ongoing for many, many years. There are a number of standards, be they industry standards such as Compressed Gas Association standards, ASME standards, and there are federal regulations on how you have to operate hydrogen systems, how you have to inspect them. So the questions that an investor should be asking, at least in my opinion, are, do you understand the requirements? And does this system meet those requirements? Not only what is right today or what's required, but what's right. There are standards and then there are approaches. So, not only are you meeting the standards, but are you thinking about other factors that you need to consider when you're evaluating a project?
Did anyone else want to jump in?
I love this question. As an investor, the minute somebody says, we can get around that, don't invest. Because that's typically what happens. You get these proprietary technologies, and we keep talking about pipelines. Hydrogen is going to be so much bigger than just what goes through a pipeline. And you can let the regulations and the standards and all those things inhibit you from doing something. They actually protect you as an investor. You go to those things that people have thought about for decades and put together, and kind of, we don't like them, but they are there to protect us. They protect the investor too. But there are so many opportunities in the hydrogen economy that the investor should be looking at today, because it's not just what government does, it's not just what quasi-government agencies do. Hydrogen will go to scale because of investment capital, not coming just from governments, but coming from the capital markets. It's happening. It's probably happening a lot faster than any of us even thought about. But there is danger ahead if we don't follow the rules, if we don't realize that this is not necessarily new. They're just new ways of doing some old things. So just when somebody says, oh, we can get around that, run.
Thanks, Alan.
I just want to mention something. I think, Rich, it was you that said it's about collaboration, because it isn't just where do you invest. And I think if you're investing on the production side, you have to make sure that there's offtake. And if you have offtake, then you have to know how is it going to move there. So it really is back to that collaborative, holistic approach. And so it's what are the processes in place and understanding those standards at the point of production, movement, so mobility, and also finally use. So it's going to be a holistic collaborative approach, and I think all of those have to be understood.
Yeah, I would just piggyback off the holistic approach. While this question addresses safety, and there are federal safety regulations, again, not to bore you, but again, there are no federal regulations for construction or siting or transportation rates or terms of conditions of service. So it would be ideal for investors, in my mind, for the federal government to take a proactive approach and lay out the regulatory regime that investors and hydrogen pipeline, interstate pipelines will know what to work with.
Thank you. I guess building off of that and maybe keying in a little bit to another question that we got from the audience, there was discussion this morning about the DOE hydrogen hubs. I would venture a guess that everybody in this room has probably heard of them. So I'd be curious how each of you kind of see the hydrogen hubs contributing to the development of safe and reliable hydrogen infrastructure, and I guess to pull in the question from the audience, what are kind of some of the standards that are being talked about or under development for the transmission of hydrogen, particularly through pipelines? I know PHMSA has been doing some work, so I don't know, Francesca, if that might be something you could talk about, but how do we see the hydrogen hubs kind of contributing to the development of safe and reliable infrastructure? Does anyone want to start?
Well, I think of the panelists up here, I'm not sure, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think, so Southwest Gas is part of a hydrogen hub, and we did submit an application to the Department of Energy for hydrogen hub funding. It's the Southwest Hydrogen Innovation Network, or what we call SHINE. And it is made up of a set of partners, 40 different partners representing upstream, midstream, downstream, research institutions, chambers of commerce, and many others. And I think we also cover a suite of applications from transportation to use in the energy space for storage. And I think that I would say, again, it is back to that holistic approach, is at each one of those points, as you use, produce, or move this molecule, each of these individual projects within the hub will have to make sure that they have a very robust set of safety standards in place. And then you add into it this other piece, which is storage. As for Southwest Gas, what we absolutely believe we can bring to the table is the evaluation, in particular distribution resources. And so we are bringing forward the research that we'll be doing in partnership with the universities to test the safe delivery and application of hydrogen in distribution applications.
If I may, we're talking about standards and design and construction. Those are very important. But the other piece that needs to be considered, and it goes back to the previous question about what investors should ask, is how are you going to operate this? It's one thing to design, you can design to standards and build a very safe piece of infrastructure. But if you don't operate it safely, if you don't know how to bring a hydrogen system on stream, how to take it off stream, either for maintenance or for decommissioning, you have an opportunity for getting someone hurt or damaging equipment. So you need to be thinking more broadly than just what are the design standards. You need to be thinking about what are the operational standards that will be applied to this system when it's in operation.
I think Rich had a point about the Hindenburg. If you think about it, natural gas is not very safe. I mean, it can kill you just from being in proximity. We put a nasty smell in it so we can smell it, because you don't really smell it. It can explode. However, it's in my house. I heat my house with it. We cook with it. It's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. One of the things is by having good standards and we've got to convince the public, because ultimately all of these midstream, upstream, downstream, it's about the public using it and having comfort that they can use it safely. We maybe need natural hydrogen. It's all in the nomenclature, right? But we've got to convince the end user. Right now, a lot of steel companies are looking at using hydrogen as the fuel source to be able to fire up their furnaces. Well, steel, paper, glass, plastics, there's any industry that uses a lot of hydrogen is going to have to say, is this safe? Well, given how they do it right now, it's different. And they don't have a lot of regulations. And trust me, all of these industries do adhere to OSHA standards. OSHA is one of the most maligned, but in my opinion, most incredible organizations, because we used to kill people who went to work. And now we lose a lot fewer people because of OSHA standards. People go home because they work safe, they live safe. And so it used to have this thing about OSHA regulations. We definitely need OSHA regulations because no company is going to suddenly switch over to hydrogen from whatever they do now until there are good OSHA regulations. Because you know what will happen? Somebody will get hurt, they will get blamed, and it's certainly going to be a kind of a point the finger at who's at fault here. And I think everybody's mentioned it. It's collaboration. We're walking down a road, and we need to do it together, whether that's your investment, whether you're in production, whether you're a user of the product, or whether you're delivering the product.
Since you mentioned OSHA, one of the questions that has actually gotten 3 votes is when will OSHA requirements related to hydrogen be updated? And the comment is that current OSHA requirements for hydrogen are super outdated. I don't know if anyone wants to comment on the update of OSHA regulations. Okay.
I will just say that is a great question that needs to be addressed, and I think that's going to be done at the federal level.
Okay, great, thank you. I guess one more question. We've got about 5 minutes left here. I'd be curious from each of you, what additional assistance do we need to get from where we are today to where we'd like to be in the future with hydrogen in a safe and reliable way? Is it additional government funding? Is it more regulatory structures? Is it more rulemakings? Kind of what are your thoughts on that?
Well, Sandy, you know what my answer will be, so I'll just state it again as succinctly as possible. We need, federal regulation, and it would be great, again, for the government to get out in front of this and to proactively provide a regulatory landscape such that the development of our hydrogen infrastructure market isn't hindered.
And from a regulated utilities perspective, we absolutely need those regulations in place because we are absolutely committed to, every single one of our employees goes home at the end of the day. That's fundamental to how we operate, that we protect those communities where we operate, and we certainly protect our customers. And so we need those codes and standards to make sure that we are delivering as safely as possible. We also need the opportunity to recover cost. So as we move towards these new innovative opportunities, how are we going to get cost recovery? We're currently investing in research and development, but we are not passing along that cost to our consumers, so to our customers. So it really is something that we are funding because, as I mentioned, we're leaning into this transition and want to put opportunities in place. We're not going to be the hydrogen market makers. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think we're going to be central to delivering on the hydrogen opportunity as it evolves, and for assuring that it can be safely delivered to all downstream applications. But we are going to need to look at what are those cost recovery mechanisms as we continue to make these investments to meet what customers are up to, what communities are up to, what economies are up to for decarbonization. And then the last thing that I'll say is that we absolutely have to consider how we're going to protect the the consumers that are the most vulnerable, even from, environmental impacts, from affordability aspects. So I think as we look at the whole conversation around environmental and economic and energy justice, we have to consider that as we look at these solutions as well. So I think a comprehensive approach on regulation, cost recovery, social justice matters will be absolutely warranted.
Okay. I said we support regulation, and we certainly do. We do need a regulatory framework. It needs to be effective and appropriate. There also needs to be an underlying foundation of standards and guidelines and good practices that companies follow, not only as they're designing and building hydrogen infrastructure, be it a plant, be it a pipeline, be it a hydrogen refueling station in the Kmart right down the street. Those need to be in place as well to support the regulatory framework. The regulatory framework can't be so specific that they get into those details, because of the way regulations are developed, that takes time, and standards developing can be more dynamic, can be faster responding to the requirements that people are finding are necessary as this infrastructure grows out. There's a good foundation today. It needs to be built up some more to address these new uses that are coming. But there is an opportunity for regulation. There is an opportunity. Maybe OSHA will at some point update their standards. We've been trying for many years to have them update our 1965 standard that they still reference. So it is not necessarily a quick.
Two things that you remember. Quick, we built an electrical infrastructure, which is my background and passion. It's unbelievably reliable. It's very robust. Back in engineering school, I used a slide rule to make things, right? Today they use computers and they don't overbuild things. We have the opportunity to go slow, and it's to your point, or go fast, or go right. And I think we're at the point where we've got to decide what right is and come together to do it. There is a huge part of this. You've heard about standards and regulation. They are there. They shouldn't be there to impede the commercialization of hydrogen. They should be there to protect us in the commercialization of hydrogen, so that we build infrastructure that lasts, that's very robust. We have a philosophy. A reliable facility is a safe facility, and a safe facility is not necessarily reliable. So start with reliability, build it right, build it for the long game, and we will address some of the safety issues and regulatory issues and standards.
Great, thank you all. I know there were a lot of questions from the audience. If your question did not get answered, please come find one of our panelists. I'm sure they would be more than happy to chat with you. Thank you all for your time. This has been such an interesting conversation. We could have gone way longer than 40 minutes. I had pages of questions I didn't get to ask. So please join me in thanking our panelists, and we'll see you on the next panel.
Thank you very much.